The floor of the correspondence room was cold in a specific way, not the cold of stone in winter, but the cold of stone that had never been warm, the specific temperature of a room that received no direct light, and that had been a correspondence room for longer than most buildings had been buildings. He had been on the floor for 11 minutes. He knew this because the candle on the writing desk was burning, and he had noted its height when he went down, and he could read the loss against his sense of how fast this particular grade of wax burned, which was a thing he had learned in approximately year 40 and had found consistently useful since. The chair had gone first. Not dramatically, chairs did not go dramatically, they simply became unavailable, the relationship between his body and the seat's surface changing from supported to not supported in the specific instant that the deterioration produced when it was producing its worst. He had been mid-sentence in a letter to the Western coordinator, and the sentence would need finishing, and the candle would need to burn at a consistent rate for him to track the time, and the floor was cold, and he was on it. He took stock, hands, the tremor present at a level that made fine work impractical, not impossible. Vision, adequate, thinking, intact. He always assessed the thinking first and last, because thinking was the thing that mattered, and the floor was simply a surface he was temporarily occupying. He had been on the floor in this room before. The first time had taken him 40 minutes to get up. He was currently at 11. The improvement was not reassuring. The door opened. Cale moved through doorways the way he moved through everything, with the specific economy of someone who had been trained to assess situations quickly and had discovered, across 4 years in this particular service, that the situations he was assessing were consistently more complex than they appeared. He stood in the doorway for 2 seconds looking at the correspondence room floor and at the scholar lying on it and at the unfinished letter on the desk and the candle burning beside it, and then he came into the room and closed the door. He did not ask if the scholar was all right. This was one of the things about Cale that the scholar had noted in the first month and had been consistently grateful for since. He did not ask questions whose answers were visible. The Western coordinator's letter, the scholar said from the floor. Third paragraph. I need the response to acknowledge his concern about the timing of the Eastern operation without confirming the timing. I understand the letter. Write it, I'll review from here. A pause, not hesitation, the specific beat of someone deciding between two responses and choosing the more useful one. You should be in bed. I should finish the correspondence. Being in bed does not finish the correspondence. Write the letter. Cale sat at the writing desk. He uncapped the ink and pulled a fresh sheet and began to write in the way he had learned to write the scholar's letters, not the scholar's exact hand, which he could not replicate, but the scholar's rhythm and register, the specific cadence that the scholar's 40 years of correspondence in this particular voice had produced. The scholar lay on the floor and listened to the scratch of the pen, and felt the tremor in his hands, and thought about the Western coordinator's timing concern, and about whether the acknowledgement Cale was drafting was going to be adequate or whether it was going to require revision. He was managing something vast from the floor of a dark room, and he was doing it the way he managed everything, precisely, without drama, with the full weight of his attention applied to the thing that required attention rather than to the fact that he was lying on cold stone. He had been doing this for 166 years. He had been on floors before. The floor was not the problem. The problem was in the correspondence stack on the desk, in the third letter from the top, which Cale had not opened because it bore a seal that Cale had been instructed to bring to the scholar's direct attention rather than reading himself. He had not been able to reach the desk since going down. Cale, he said, the letter is almost done. After the letter, the one with the double seal, read it to me. A pause. I was told you read those yourself. I am reading it through you. Write it. Cale finished the Western Coordinator's letter and set it aside and picked up the double-sealed envelope and broke the outer seal, and then the inner seal in the specific order that the scholar had taught him in the first month. Outer first, inner second, a particular angle for the inner that prevented damage to the notation on the seal's reverse, which bore information about routing that the scholar sometimes needed before the letter itself was opened. He read it. The scholar lay on the floor and listened. The letter was from a regional contact in the Northern Territories, one of a network of people who reported specific categories of information through a specific chain of intermediaries, a chain so carefully constructed that the contact did not know who their report would eventually reach, and the scholar did not know who had written it. The contact reported. A still watch field operative had been observed on the northern coastal approach for 3 consecutive nights, tracking an undead movement anomaly. The operative's description matched the profile of an individual the contact had been asked to watch for. The operative had not been followed. The instruction had been to observe and report, not to intercept. The operative had reached the coastal headland on the 3rd night. The scholar was quiet for a moment after Cale finished. The headland, he knew the headland. He knew precisely what was at the headland, and he knew precisely what a still watch operative who was good enough to track the anomaly over 3 nights would find there. Because the thing at the headland was findable, and he had known it was findable, and had assessed the probability of it being found as acceptable given the operational value of its location. He had been wrong about the probability. The assessment had been correct at the time it was made. He updated it now from the floor to reflect the current situation. The current situation was that the still watch had a field operative who was better than his intelligence had suggested and who had reached the headland and who had presumably found the mark. He thought about what it meant that the mark had been found. He thought about it with the specific compression of someone who had been making these assessments for 166 years and had learned to reach conclusions at the speed that the situation required rather than the speed that comfort preferred. It meant the watch's picture was further along than his last assessment. It meant the window before confirmation had shortened. It meant something needed to happen in the network's northern layer that he had been planning to defer for 2 months. It did not mean the architecture was compromised. The headland was a data point, a very capable data point in the hands of a very capable operative, but a data point nonetheless. What the operative had found at the headland was real and was connected to the picture the watch was building, but the connection required specific knowledge that the operative almost certainly did not have. Yet. "Get me up," he said. Cale came around the desk and provided the support that the scholar needed to get from horizontal to vertical without the hands, which were still shaking in a way that made them unreliable for pushing off stone. The process took 30 seconds and required a quality of assistance that was entirely practical and that Cale had developed over the past 2 months. Not hovering, not careful in a way that emphasized the difficulty, simply present and calibrated to exactly the weight and balance that was needed. The scholar sat in the chair. He looked at the writing desk. He looked at the double-sealed letter and the Western Coordinator's letter and the rest of the correspondence stack. "The northern layer," he said. "I need to write 3 letters. The first to the layer's primary coordinator. The second to a specific regional contact I have not yet named to you. The third," he paused, not a pause of uncertainty, the pause of someone who had been approaching a decision for 2 months and had just found the moment at which the approach ended and the decision was made. "The third I will write myself, when my hands are steadier." Cale pulled fresh paper from the drawer. "Tell me the first one." The scholar dictated. He dictated with the precision he had been dictating with for 166 years, not reading from notes, constructing the letter in real time, sentence by sentence, each one complete before the next one began. The first letter to the Northern Coordinator was 3 paragraphs and took 12 minutes and contained no words that were not necessary. The second letter to the regional contact was shorter, a single paragraph, a specific instruction, the kind of instruction that sounded like a request and functioned as an order. Cale wrote both without comment. When both were finished, the scholar asked Cale to leave him for an hour. Cale looked at him with the specific expression of someone who wanted to say something and had decided the something was not his to say. "I am fine," the scholar said. "The hour is for thinking, not for collapsing again." "You'll call if—" "I will not need to call. The hour is for thinking." Cale left. The door closed in the careful way it always closed, the specific care of someone who understood that a closing door in a correspondence room was a sound that required consideration. The scholar sat at the desk with the fresh paper and the ink and the hands that were still not steady enough for the third letter. He did not try to write it yet. He sat with the hour and let the thinking do what the thinking needed to do. The still watch operative at the headland, the mark found, the window shortened. He had known, in the abstract sense that he had known many things for many years, without knowing their specific timing, that this moment would arrive. The watch's intelligence work had been improving for years. The specific individual who ran the watch's northern operations was the best institutional intelligence analyst the coastal world had produced in his operational experience. He had been watching her build the picture for 3 years, and had been assessing the timeline of her confirmation with the same care he gave all timelines. The timeline had just moved. He thought about the third letter, what it needed to say and to whom it needed to be said, and what it would set in motion. The third letter was not a management letter. It was not the kind of letter he dictated to Cale or sent through the standard chain. The third letter was the kind he had written perhaps 40 times in 166 years, in the specific circumstances where the architecture required something that the architecture's normal instruments could not produce. He thought about it for the full hour. When Cale came back, the scholar was at the desk with the pen in his hand, and the tremor still present but manageable. Not the shaking of the collapse, but the baseline tremor he had been living with for 6 months. The one he had learned to write around rather than waiting for it to stop. Because waiting for it to stop was waiting for something that was not going to stop. "I am going to write the third letter," he said. "I would like you to remain in the building but not in this room." Cale accepted this with the specific quality of acceptance that was one of his most valuable characteristics, not the acceptance of someone who did not want to know things, but the acceptance of someone who understood when the knowledge was not yet theirs to have. He left again. The door closed again. The scholar pulled the black sealing wax from the drawer on the desk's left side. He had not used the black wax in 4 months. The candle was still burning, had been burning since before the collapse, through the hour of thinking, a thin, reliable light in the correspondence room's specific dark. He lit the wax beneath it. He watched it soften. He thought, while it softened, about a woman who had written 4 times is not wrong in a cramped and tidy hand in the margin of the 7th page, and who had been standing across a 30-meter chamber from him when the nexus went. He had not said her name since year 0. He was not going to say it now. But he thought it, in the specific interior way he allowed himself to think it, not the name as sound, the name as the specific weight of a person who had been the most honest person he knew, whose honesty had looked at a calculation 4 times and had not been wrong, and for whom he had taken 1 step before the nexus made the step irrelevant. The wax was ready. He poured it. He pressed the seal, 3 downward lines. He wrote the letter in the hand that 166 years had produced, the hand that had been the Collegium's youngest High Arcanist's careful script, and that had been refined across every subsequent year into something that was still recognizably the same hand, and was also something the young Arcanist would not have recognized as his own. He wrote with the baseline tremor, and around it. He finished the letter. He folded it and sealed it with the black wax while it was still warm. He set it in the outgoing correspondence. Then he sat for a moment with the window dark and the candle burning down and the architecture intact, and the timeline moved and the third letter sent, and felt what he felt about all of those things in the order he felt them and without managing it. Because managing it was what the rest of the hour was for, and this moment right here, was the one he allowed himself before the management began. Then he called Cale back in and began the rest of the correspondence. There was always more correspondence.